Welcome back to the channel, you guys. If you're here for the tutorial, the build of this laser cut stitching pony, I'm gonna link the timestamp right here, right now, so you can skip forward to that. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about stitching ponies and why I decided to kind of design one. So if you want to stay for that, don't skip ahead. So here we go. All right, guys, so here at Open Sea Leather, we have tons of stitching ponies, tons of different kinds. They all work great. However, we've made about 50,000 wallets now, so durability is a huge issue. And I wanted to design a stitching pony that wasn't bulletproof, but that had replaceable components for the things that like fail the most. And this is like the first iteration. I'm probably going to change the design a little bit, but this file is available for download if you have a laser cutter and you want to make this. Totally can. Little caveat, I don't know if it's any cheaper than buying one, but it's a fun project. If you're a crafty person, it's cool to do stuff like this. So we're going to kind of go budget to high end just to kind of show you what some of the options are out there. So first is this Amazon stitching pony. This is maybe $20, $25. Honestly, it's not the worst. We use these in our classes. You definitely want to replace this PU leather with something else because it has some oil in it and it gets on your project. So you just replace it with some regular leather. But this has a simple latch design and it works okay. I don't know how durable these are because they don't get like a ton of reps, but they've been working great. It's a great starter option. You just sit on it in like a chair, and that's how it stays steady. And honestly, they've worked better than I would have imagined for the price point. The next one is this one here that I actually built. I have another video building this, and I will link that below. This is a budget option, but it's very sturdy, it's very durable, and you can buy basic components from Lowe's for this build, including this knob and this carriage bolt. It's got a little spring in there to open up the jaws and to close as well. So it works, and you can build it yourself. Same thing, you sit on it, but in the other way, you put both your hammies right there, right? Next one has definitely been a workhorse here at Open Sea Leather. Definitely is not without its flaws though, and these are the main ones. Right here, this always tends to break. This little knob here, it looks really cool, but it eventually falls apart because we're using them so often. So a lot of times we end up just drilling these into our workstation, so it's just super sturdy. And the other issue too that happens a lot, this one hasn't done this yet, but if I open it up, I'll show you that there's like an insert inside. I think it's a barrel bolt. So inside, yeah, inside here is this barrel nut insert. I said barrel bolt, it's a barrel nut. And those are fine, but they strip. And the problem with this design is you can't take it out. You'd have to drill it out, which is super annoying. If they just had like a little access point so you could replace that barrel nut, that would be great, but it doesn't have that. So if you're opening and closing your stitching pony all the time, eventually the threads are gonna wear out. I mean, that's just the way it's gonna go. It's just like there's a little bit of grinding every time you open and close. So if you open and close your stitching pony hundreds of times a day, eventually the thing's gonna fall apart and then you can't fix it, which is a super bummer. Similar issue with this super nice one from Wingwave Design. I love this stitching pony. It is very, very cool. But again, in an attempt to look cool, but not necessarily be super durable, you can see right here, that broke. So this was where the clamp was and it just busted and I tried to fix it, but I'm not a woodworker. The way we get around that is I just like to use these clamps, these wood clamps, right? And I've built this, we're gonna finish this up later, but in our design, it just connects to the table like that. If these ever wear out, they're $5. So they're super easy to replace. And it's nice because you can get clamps that are way bigger, so you can attach it to any surface. This one, you're limited. The crazy thing about this too, if I was able to tighten this down all the way, it can't even get onto like 3/4 ply if there's not enough travel, and then it can only get so big, and so you're really limited to where you can put it. Sometimes we have super big, thick workbenches, or thin, and you want to be able to do that, and you can with just a simple $5 clamp. and that's why we're gonna use them. Do they look as pretty? No, they don't, but we're talking about functionality here, not so much aesthetics. One more we're gonna look at is this one. I was really hopeful for this one, but this has a major flaw. If you see me tightening, if you look closely right here, I don't know if you can tell, but right there, it's also stripped. So I'm trying to tighten and it's not grabbing the teeth, so it won't close. And I could easily fix this by getting a new one of these, but they don't sell these individually. So that's really annoying. I'm sure I could source that somewhere, and I probably will, so we can get this thing working again. But that happened within like a month of having it, which is a real bummer, you know? So just be aware of these things. I like to use replaceable components, like simple carriage bolts and knobs from Lowe's. These are super cheap. If they wear out, you just slip them out and put a new one in. And that way you get a lot more life out of your stitching pony. That being said, we're gonna look at one more fancy pony for those of you that got deep pockets, and then we'll get into the build. This one is so sick, but it's very expensive. The cool thing about it is it's got a huge jaw, so you can mount it on anything. You can mount it underneath, you can mount it on top. It's got an amazing ball joint system where the whole thing rotates around, and it's all like steel, like brushed steel and aluminum construction, I think. This isn't even mine, this is my friend Sam's, who owns Title Theory. And it's got this cool clip system to tighten, and then it's cleverly hidden so that your thread doesn't get caught when you're stitching. So I can't give this one a full review because she hasn't had it that long in terms of like how durable it is, but it is beautiful, it is expensive, it looks very well built. So that's definitely an option, but I think this is $200 plus, and it's available at Rocky Mountain Leather. All right guys, welcome to the tutorial. We're gonna go through the tool list really quick. We'll start with the actual cut plan. So in your Glowforge files or just your PDF files, you can use any laser cutter for this. You're gonna see, I think it's 6 different files, but they're just labeled cut 1, cut 2, cut 3, and then one of them you have to cut 4 times. I'm sure there's a more efficient way to lay these out, but I wanted to make sure they all fit. So if you have a bigger laser cutter, you can totally use that. Or you can even use these files for a CNC machine. It's gonna work the same way. You could cut thicker laminate pieces. These are 1/8 inch, but you could go heavier with a CNC machine or something like that. And also my Glowforge kind of sucks right now, and so I'm only getting through 1/8 inch plywood, but it's supposed to go up to 1/4 inch. So you could change the, you know, the specs on this and just like cut the pieces in half. But if you're a crafty person, you'll figure it out. So real quick, in the layout sheet, you will see how many you need of each piece. I can't 3D model, so I couldn't give you a different angle of this, but this is how it's gonna go together. This is kind of the schematics, if you will. Now that you've had everything cut, I'm assuming you know how to do that. If you have a Glowforge, you know how to cut these files. They should just pop in there. For this birch, I use thick maple setting, because that's what cuts through it, but test if you need to. So in terms of tools, you don't need a flush cut saw for the dowels. You can use any saw. This just makes it a little bit easier, get a little closer, but we are gonna sand a ton. And that's because most of the time wait, quick caveat, I'm not a woodworker. The last time I made a stitching pony video, a few people pointed that out. Yeah, I know. I'm gonna do a lot of things here that a typical woodworker wouldn't do, but we're making use with the tools that we have. So with these pieces, it would be way better if we had the whole glue up first in big blocks and then used like a bandsaw and then like a flush trim router and use these as templates. Obviously there are better ways to do this. It's hard to glue these up and keep them flush. That's why we're gonna do a lot of work on the belt sander to smooth everything out. But if you have a Glowforge and you don't have a ton of woodworking tools, this is definitely an option. Moving on to the tools, or at least what you have to get from Lowe's. We're gonna get at least one clamp to connect to the table. You will need a bunch of clamps for the glue up, but you need this for the actual stitching pony to mount it to your table. You're gonna get a 5-inch carriage bolt, that's 5/16, and a 6-inch, that's 5/16. So just 2 of those. And then 2 5/16 knobs, the female knobs, again from Lowe's. A 3.5-inch compression spring. This comes in a little 2-pack, which is nice. I use these little brass nails to add durability to the leather I wrap around the jaws, and it looks pretty. So you don't have to do that. I just find that if it's just glued, it tends to peel up. You'll need 7 4-inch dowels. You can buy like these dowels in like I think 36-inch lengths, which is enough to get 7. And these are 3/8-inch dowels. You'll need a little wood glue. This is the one I'm using. I don't know if it's good. I think I heard a carpenter or whatever YouTuber say that Titebond 2 is better than 3. I don't know if that's true. I've got a little butcher block cutting board oil. You can finish this any way you want after you sand it. You could stain it, you could lacquer it, whatever. This is what I like because it just adds a little bit of moisture to your stitching pony. All right, and then we have like a couple, mallets to hammer in the dowels. We gotta make sure we have a 3/8-inch driver bit as well as a 5/16. We're gonna start putting it together with the glue up because that's kind of the only thing you have to do after you have it cut. And then we'll do the finishing. So let's get into the glue up. So last night I glued some of these pieces up. I glued up this B in 2 sets of 4 if you're doing 1/8-inch plywood. And then I glued up B1 the same way. The reason why is these go together like this, and I want to be able to sand without this knob thing, this piece getting in the way. It's just going to be way easier on the belt sander. So I glued up those separately, then we're going to glue them together. But there's an order of operations here because the hinge goes in like this. So we do have to connect the C in here before we do the last piece of the glue up on this. So just letting you guys know, I pre-glued these and I didn't use the dowels to line those up, but with these, which is C and then A, I'm gonna use the dowels to line everything up as I glue. You kind of have to go kind of fast because there's a lot of layers here. And if the glue sets up before you clamp it, that's like kind of an issue. But I was able to do it with this block here, which is D. Everything's glued up. I use a little corner of a box to get everything to line up. It's not perfect. Again, that's why we're gonna use the sander. So the D is already glued up as well as B1 and the Bs. So we're just gonna go ahead and hit the C's and the A's right now. So we're gonna do the glue up. I'm gonna use my favorite glue spreader. And the first couple, like the first few, I'm just lining up the best I can. And then I'm gonna put the dowel in, kind of hammer it in, and then keep going. Just keep in mind that you don't want dowels in, see, this hole here yet, because that's the hinge hole. And that hole's a tiny bit bigger than the others so that it can spin freely. Just want to reiterate one more time, I'm not a woodworker. So chill, dude. And don't worry too much about getting glue in the hinge hole because we're gonna take our drill bit and just kind of clean these all out. All right, so about right there, I'm gonna put these dowels in. And then keep going. I have these holes cut just tiny bit above 3/8. So the dowels don't really add any durability. They're more there just to line things up. Make sure you have 12 layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, good. Now that's like that, we can glue these up. Clamp them up, and then I'll cut off the dowels later. Same thing on A, I'm just going to glue up a few layers first. None of these holes are the hinge holes. They're permanent, so don't need to worry about that. I also saw on YouTube a salt trick where if you don't want these pieces sliding around, after you put the glue down and smooth it out, just sprinkle a little bit of salt on there, create some friction, and it kind of like helps grab it so it doesn't slide. I don't have any salt here though, so. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and put the dowels in now. I'm gonna try and put clamps, as many as I have on here. This wood definitely compresses a bit. Okay, so while those two set up for at least 30 minutes, I'm gonna go and sand the pieces that I glued up yesterday. All right, so because we're doing this not like a woodworker, we have to like, you know, improvise a little bit. So these holes, once these 3 pieces are glued up, which are, let me remember, yeah, so B1 and the Bs, so you have 4, 4, and then the 12. We're gonna have to just take our 3/8 inch bit and just kind of clean out the holes a little bit, because we wanna glue these 3 up together. The only one that we're gonna leave open is the bottom of the Bs, because that's where the hinge is gonna go. So we're gonna clean these out real quick. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but basically we're gonna sandwich B1s with the Bs. I don't expect these all to line up perfectly because I've sanded a bunch of them, so we're gonna take it to the sander after this is glued up and fill in those, like, well, take off those, the parts where they don't quite align. Yeah, just remember that last hole right there is for the hinge. Yeah, it's off a little bit, but we'll clean it up. You don't have to do it this way where we did it in 3 pieces. I thought you did because of the order operations, but I changed the design. So you can actually just do this full glue up all at once, so it's not so misaligned. This one should be dry. I'm gonna go clean this one up. First, I'm gonna cut off these. Always cut towards your hand. Just kidding. I honestly just don't know how to hold this without doing that, so.
You could clamp it to the table.
That's true. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm gonna clean out the hinge hole real quick. See how this fits. Okay, good. You just want this to be able to spin freely. All right, I got everything rough sanded, including my fingers from the belt sander. Now you just take a sanding block or just some sandpaper and just kind of clean up those 90 degrees, just so they're not real sharp and they're nice and smooth. Once you're done with that, we're gonna grab our D block right here, and then we're gonna measure to the center of it. Depending on how hard you compressed it, it should be a little less than 2.5 or 2.5. So go ahead and mark right in the middle and then down from the top 1/2 inch. And that's where we're gonna drill with our 5/16 inch bit. This would be a great time to have a drill press, but I don't have one. So I'm gonna just go slow. Not that close, but close enough. Again, drill press would be, or just a jig or something. Just kind of sanding down the holes. So if you have like an 11/32 bit, something just barely above 5/16, you don't need the teeth to bite in this hole. That doesn't matter. Just having it slide through is fine. You can even go 3/8 here. It doesn't matter if there's a little bit of play, because this hole is what's gonna be able to make this tilt towards you, and you just tighten it down with a knob. So having a hole with some play doesn't really matter. So use 3/8 if you want, if you don't have a 11/32. Okay, and then for this one, we want to have about an inch above that, because when this tilts down to different positions, we want to make sure it doesn't hit the table we're clamped to. So it just needs to be up about an inch. So we want to come up this 1.5. I'm not doing the final assembly yet. I'm just fitting it. All right, so on this one right here, we can match where this hole is. I hope there are some woodworkers just getting like a good laugh out of all this. At least it'll be entertaining in that way. But seriously, save the time in the comments, because I'm probably not gonna do this again. So, I don't have a giant ego where I can't take criticism. I'm just saying if you're trying to give me tips for next time, there's not gonna be a next time. So, save it. Or comment anyway for the algorithm, I don't care. Write novels. Tell me how terrible I am. On that note, don't forget to like and subscribe. Trying to get to 10,000 followers or subscribers. I know subs don't mean a whole lot these days on YouTube, but it means a lot to me, my personal validation. So I'll keep making videos if people subscribe and watch. If not, what's the point, right? So this has had about a half an hour to set up. We have to go clean up some of the stuff on the belt sander again. Get things all square, because they're definitely not square at all right now. Ew, gross. So if you have a stitching pony, chances are you've already done this before, but I'm gonna wrap the jaws in leather. I'll show you a little trick I like to do too. So in here is a little magnet, right? So what you do is you skive down some leather really thin, split it down if you have a splitter, and you sandwich it, and then you cut out this hole here, and then you stitch around so that when you're stitching, you'll have this little magnet here for when you're doing really long runs. Instead of putting the needle in your mouth, which I usually do, you can just place your needle here and then pull the rest of the thread through. So right here, I'm just lining it up. I kind of want the two ends to meet. If you're curious, this piece of leather is 11 inches long. So keep that in mind if you're gonna make one. It doesn't have to be this long, but I want this to almost be vertical. So that's why I made it as long as I did. I'm gonna mark this line here, and I'm just gonna pull the leather just barely over it so you can't see it. But right here, I'm gonna measure, so when I do the other side, they're the exact same. So I'm gonna oil this later. You don't wanna oil it before this step though, because the contact cement won't stick as well. I'm just using this Weldwood contact cement. This is a good leather glue as well. The reason why we wrap the jaws in leather is so that the jaws don't mark up our work when we have it in the stitching pony. I don't know why they all don't just come with it, because it seems like every single person does it. I have noticed that sometimes you need 2 coats on the wood because it kind of sucks up the glue, especially if it's a new can. Drying time, setup time for contact cement changes with like how old the can is because of the oxidation. Okay, so that needs to cure for a little bit. I want to make sure it's like not wet to the touch before you put it on, or else it won't stick. All right, so this is where we're going to put the knob on the B side. So pretty much line your knob up. You just want the curved part of like this kind of built-in washer thing just to be about flush with, a little less than flush right there. And that will give you enough clearance to turn it. So if you just line that up. So for this one, we're gonna use a 3/8 inch bit, and we're actually gonna try and open it up a bit, up and down, because when this opens, the angle of this channel or that hole changes. So it needs to have play, or else it's not gonna like slide on the carriage bolt. It's got some clearance. And you can open that as big as you want, but you just have to remember you're gonna have some play when you open your jaws. It's not that big of a deal. I have a workaround for my next design for that issue. We're gonna line these up as best we can, and then take this bolt through so we can mark the other side of the carriage bolt. This side can actually be 5/8. You don't need any play on this side. We're almost ready for final assembly, but we're gonna get, before we put it all together, we wanna put the leather on. All right, so then we apply this just as you'd imagine. Just try and make sure it's nice and straight. So a lot of people stop there usually, but I just find that they tend to peel up over time. These are little 5/8 brass nails. I use them for shoemaking, for sole accents. Oh, one tip, definitely don't use a leather that has any oils in it. Well, then we'll go ahead and do the other side. I'm gonna let that cure a little bit more. In the meantime, I'm gonna oil up the wood. Try not to get too much oil on your leather because it's just gonna transfer to your projects. So it's not that big of a deal, but again, this is just some cutting board oil. I just like a natural finish. I like the way that the wood patinas. If you get a little down here, it's not that big of a deal. The main place you don't want it is right here in the jaws. So just added my logo right there in copper, because why not? I had it in the file originally to engrave it, but I figured people wouldn't want that on their stitching pony, which is fair. So now we're gonna go ahead and do the final assembly. So for this, you need all your pieces. Then you need your 6-inch carriage bolt and your 5-inch, and your spring and your knobs. Okay, so the 6-inch goes in the top one and the 5-inch goes in the bottom one. We're gonna do the bottom one first. So just go in from the A side. Hammer it in. And that way that side doesn't turn. So it's like having a little bolt on that side. So for this, we can put, it doesn't need glue in these ends. I don't think it's gonna like slide out, but if you want to glue in these sides, that's fine. You just don't want the middle to be glued because you want it to spin. All right, now I'm just gonna cut those off. Gonna do a little bit of adjustment here. Ideally, you'd clamp everything together and just drill through all at once, but okay, there's that one. Then the 6-inch goes up top. Open it up. Put the spring through. Nice. All right, guys, there you go. Glowforge stitching pony. Definitely room for some improvements, some things I would change. Keep your eyes out for version 2, whenever that's coming. But if you make one of these, please tag me on Instagram. I will repost it, give your leather goods company a little bit of love. Thanks for watching. Again, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you want me to do next.